Patrick Cook here. Welcome to Fun with Mandelbulb Mutations. This is tutorial series number 4. You know, the Mandelbulb3D application is difficult to use. It is intimidating. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is that it has a steep learning curve. Documentation is sparse. There was an effort, kind of a wiki effort to document the Mandelbulb3D application. It's up online. I'll put a link here up on the screen. But that documentation is incomplete, and that's very unfortunate. And what lack of documentation does is it tends to stifle the use of a software application. So I think we can pretty much agree that the Mandelbulb3D application is intimidating to use because of lack of documentation. The tutorials that you'll find up online tend to be very introductory, a noble effort. And they do tend to be quite old. Now, the other thing about the Mandelbulb application is that the interface is not current standard. This is a 2013 vintage software application, and at the time, it was fine. It uses the Delphi development environment, and Delphi, of course, has its own user interface standards. So the application does not adhere to current modern day software application interface standards, okay? Now that makes it a little tricky. You need to understand the application itself. You don't really have a transfer of use knowledge from other software applications that you utilize. That contributes to making the Mandelbulb a little bit more difficult to use than it might otherwise have been. Okay? Now, the other thing to consider too about the Mandelbulb3D application is that the graphics that you create with it are not predictable. And that makes it very challenging. You can't just, like a 3D modeling application, you'd say, well, look, I want to make a human figure, okay? And there's tools for that. There's guidelines for that. You have an idea of where you're going. With the Mandelbulb3D application, with its graphics, you're not really sure where you're going with it. And that makes it a little tricky. I mean, for instance, if we were to take this graphic right here, which is made up of a transform and an A-box mod 1 formula. This is something I've created a while back. If I wanted to modify that, I could come into these properties here. The problem is that I can't predict what these property changes are going to do. I mean, if I took this scale from a 2 to a 3 and then recalculated it, I had no way of predicting that that's what that scale modification was going to do to the graphic. Now, that's one of the things that makes the Mandelbulb 3D application harder to use, is that you don't have a predictable route that you can take with your Mandelbulb graphics. Let's make a 2.5 there, and let's see what happens. So the Mandelbulb application, I keep saying this, and I'll keep saying it again. The Mandelbulb3D fractal generator application is a process of discovery. All you can do is try things and see what happens. Let's put a 2.1 in there, 2.1, okay? All right. Okay, now we're closer to what I had before. You can see here a slight difference in the graphic. Let me put 2.0 in there. Now watch down here. Okay, now this is a scale property that I'm adjusting. Calculate that. All right, well, the scale has been modified. The point I'm making is that the Mandelbulb3D fractal generator is not it is not an application that you can use with a predetermined outcome. If you were to use the application a lot and you have years of accumulated experience, you get better at predicting where you're going in terms of your graphics. But it's very difficult to do. All right, now that I've thoroughly frustrated you on the Mandelbulb3D application, and I've made it clear that the tutorials are not really there, the documentation is not really there, the interface is old style by today's standards, but more importantly, you don't really know where you're going in terms of the graphics. The only thing you can really do is to ease in and accept a discovery process. Now, with that said, there is some salvation. All right, there are tools within the Mandelbulb software application that we can use that will help us get through that discovery process easier, funner, and perhaps more creatively. Now, just to kind of end this session here, one of those tools certainly is you can modify the properties in the formula tabs, okay, the formula slots, okay. You can modify those and recalculate. Experiment. That's how you do it. The other way you can do it is to use the navigator. Let me get the navigator down here. You can use the navigator and you can very quickly modify your properties. There's a scale we were working with. I'll go 2 point, okay, you see? All right, so I can do that, and then I can push that back to main, and I can calculate. And I have easily made a property, a formula property adjustment. Now I get a sense for the change that I made here in the navigator, although it is a lower resolution and it doesn't respect the lighting and the coloring. The reason for that is that the application is designed to draw the new graphic based upon your property changes, to draw it very quickly. There's a cost for that. That cost, of course, is quality, resolution, and the retention of light and shadows and coloring are pretty much degraded. However, from a graphic design or a graphic structure standpoint, you get an idea, and then you can push that to main, and then you can go about your discovery in that manner. Okay, so let's put this back to 2.0. All right, push that to main, and all right, I don't need the navigator anymore. All right, recalculate now. Okay, so there's the navigator, and this navigator is a tool that you can use to engage in the discovery process of the Mandelbulb graphic. There's another tool, and the tool we're going to talk about in this tutorial series is the MutaGen. Now that is a very clever tool, and this MutaGen tool is going to, if we use it, all right, for this purpose, it's going to greatly enhance your creativity, your ability to discover Mandelbulb graphics. to basically to fast track your discovery process using the Mandelbulb3D fractal generator application. All right, so when we come back in session number 2, we're going to talk about this MutaGen, and the whole point and purpose of this tutorial series, series number 4, is to do a deep dive into this MutaGen and see what we can do with it. We'll talk about the use cases, we'll talk about certainly the interface and the functionality, its quirks, and its risks as well. Okay? I'll see you in session number 2, where we're going to talk about this MutaGen tool that's built in to the Mandelbulb3D fractal generator application. I'll see you in session 2.